Welcome to Potty! May 9, 2026. Here's a question that should make every school IT administrator deeply uncomfortable right now. What if the most catastrophic data breach in the history of US education was triggered not by a sophisticated zero-day exploit, not by nation-state hackers with unlimited resources, but by someone signing up for a free teacher account? No verification required, no institutional oversight, just a name and an email, and then exploiting a single line of authorization logic that returned the wrong value when a field was empty. That's the Canvas LMS story. And the reason it matters isn't just the scale, which is staggering. It's the mechanism, because the mechanism tells us something deeply uncomfortable about how we've been building SaaS platforms for the last decade, and how growth-friendly product decisions can silently become existential security risks. So let me set the stage here, because the full picture is important. Canvas, built by a company called Instructure, is not just a popular learning management system. It is the dominant LMS in US higher education and K-12. We're talking about an estimated 8,800 plus institutions, universities, community colleges, school districts, and tens of millions of students and educators worldwide. It's a multi-tenant SaaS platform, meaning thousands of schools all share the same underlying infrastructure. Their data is supposed to be logically isolated. Your university can't see another university's data, but they're all running on the same system. That architecture is incredibly efficient and cost-effective, but it also means the blast radius of any cross-tenant vulnerability isn't one school. It's every school, all 8,800 of them simultaneously. Now let's talk about who we're dealing with on the attacker side, because this isn't some anonymous script kiddie. ShinyHunters is one of the most prolific cybercriminal groups operating right now. Their documented history reads like a greatest hits of modern data extortion. Ticketmaster, Santander Bank, a whole wave of companies connected to Snowflake, AT&T. Their playbook is fairly consistent. Find a seam in the authentication or authorization model. Exploit it to exfiltrate data at scale. Then apply extortion pressure. Pay up or we publish everything. And what makes them particularly dangerous is they're not just technically capable. They're strategically sophisticated about timing and leverage. We'll come back to that when we talk about what might happen next. But you need to understand who this group is to understand why the Canvas situation is so alarming. Here's what most people get wrong about this breach. They hear hack, and they imagine someone cracking encryption, bypassing firewalls, doing something that required extraordinary technical skill. But that's not what allegedly happened here. What allegedly happened is almost more troubling, because it was so simple. Canvas offers something called a free-for-teacher tier. The idea is genuinely good from a product standpoint. Lower the barrier to adoption. Let individual educators try the platform without needing their institution to buy in first. You sign up, you get access. You can explore Canvas features. No institutional affiliation required. No verification process. No oversight from any school or district. And that design decision, which probably looked like a smart growth hack in a product meeting, became the attack surface. So here's the alleged attack chain, step by step. And I want to walk through this carefully because the technical detail is where the real insight lives. ShinyHunters signs up for one of these free-for-teacher accounts. Totally legitimate process. Then they go to account settings, generate a new personal access token. Again, this is a standard feature. It's how developers and power users authenticate with Canvas APIs. No developer key required for this step. No institutional approval. Just a token tied to their account. Then they use that token to call Canvas APIs. And this is where the critical flaw enters the picture. When that API call comes in, Canvas runs an internal authorization function called authorized for account. And the name tells you what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to check, is this token authorized to access data for this specific account, this specific tenant? The flaw is in the logic. The function returns true, meaning authorized by default, unless a developer key is present. The check essentially says, if there's a developer key, look at what it's scoped to. But personal access tokens don't have a developer key attached. So the developer key field is nil. It's null, it's empty. Nothing's there. And the function interprets that nil as a pass condition. No developer key, no problem. Come on in. Access granted to everything. All 8,800 institutions. I want to pause on this for a second because this is one of those moments where the technical detail and the security principle are perfectly aligned in a way that's actually clarifying. What I just described has a name in security architecture. It's called fail-open, the opposite of what you want. The security by default principle says your systems should fail closed. If something is missing, if a check can't be completed, if a value isn't there, the default answer should be no, deny, blah, require explicit permission. What Canvas had was a system that said if the expected parameter is missing, the answer is yes. And in a multi-tenant SaaS platform serving 8,800 institutions, a fail-open authorization check at the API layer is essentially a master key. One free account, one token, access to... Let me give you an analogy that might make this click. Imagine a massive office building with 8,800 separate company suites. Each company has its own locked door. The building has a security desk. And when someone shows up, the guard is supposed to check their key card against a list of which suite they're allowed into. But the rule the guard was given is, check the key card. If there's no list entry for this card, let them in everywhere. The list entry is missing? That's a pass. That's essentially what the authorized for account logic was doing. The absence of a developer key, the absence of a restriction, was being interpreted as permission rather than as a reason to deny. And ShinyHunters walked up to that security desk with a free account and an empty list entry, and the guard waved them through to every floor. Now, let's talk about what ShinyHunters claims to have done with that access. The group claims to have exfiltrated somewhere between 275 and 280 million records covering teachers and students. One headline I came across frames it as, Instructure Hacker Claims Data Theft from 8,800 Schools, Universities, and that framing is accurate to the scope of what's being alleged. We're potentially talking about student PII, names, email addresses, enrollment data, possibly grades, possibly communications. The kind of information that is federally protected under FERPA for U.S. institutions, and under COPA for K-12 students who are minors. The scale here is not a rounding error. If even a fraction of that 280 million figure is accurate, this is one of the largest education data breaches ever recorded. Then, on May 7th, things escalated. Canvas went offline for several hours. Headlines started appearing. Canvas backup after ShinyHunters hack forced shutdown. Cybercrime group crashes Penn's Canvas system, demands ransom. The University of Pennsylvania was specifically named in reporting as one of the affected institutions during that outage. A defacement page apparently appeared on the AWS Educate Canvas login. ShinyHunters posted an extortion demand. Instructure confirmed the April 29 breach, and they stated that no user data was stolen during the May 7 incident itself, meaning the outage and defacement were a separate pressure event, not a second data exfiltration. But the ransom demand is still live. The threat to publish the data is still active, and the clock is ticking. There's a headline that really crystallized the full picture for me. Canvas restored after hack. Breach traced to free for teacher account. That framing is so important because it's not just telling you what happened, it's telling you where the attack surface was. And I think that's the detail that the edtech industry needs to sit with. The breach didn't come from a sophisticated infrastructure compromise. It came from a product feature designed to reduce friction for educators. The free for teacher account is, in isolation, a reasonable product decision. But when you combine it with an API authorization model that fails open on personal access tokens, You've created a pathway that any sufficiently motivated attacker can walk through with zero institutional accountability attached. This attack pattern is also not entirely new, and that's worth saying explicitly. If you followed the 2024 Snowflake breach campaign, which ShinyHunters was also linked to, there's a real structural parallel here. In the Snowflake situation, ShinyHunters didn't break Snowflake's core infrastructure. They exploited customer accounts that lacked multi-factor authentication. The seam they found was between Snowflake's security model and its customer-facing onboarding flexibility. The Canvas situation rhymes almost perfectly. They didn't break Canvas's core infrastructure either. They found the seam between Canvas's security model and its free-for-teacher onboarding flexibility. Same group, same strategic approach, different platform, different sector. And yet somehow the lesson from Snowflake didn't fully translate into a Canvas audit of equivalent risk vectors. That's the part that should keep security architects up at night. Let me zoom out and talk about what this means for the broader SaaS security landscape. Because the Canvas breach is a case study in something that affects way more than just infrastructure. In multi-tenant SaaS architectures, tenant isolation is supposed to be enforced at multiple layers simultaneously. The data model layer, the API gateway layer, and the application authorization layer. The theory is defense in depth. Even if one layer has a flaw, the others catch it. What the Canvas incident illustrates is that when the application authorization layer fails open, it can bypass everything else. And the personal access token vector is particularly dangerous because these tokens are long-lived. They often lack fine-grained scopes, and they bypass OAuth flows that might otherwise enforce stricter checks. GitHub, GitLab, Canvas. Any developer-facing platform that issues personal access tokens needs to be asking, what happens when one of those tokens hits an authorization check and an expected parameter is missing? What does our logic return? The FERPA and regulatory dimension here is genuinely complex, and I don't want to gloss over it. Every U.S. institution using Canvas has FERPA obligations, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, which governs how student education records are handled and who is responsible when they're exposed. K-12 institutions add COPPA into the mix, because many of those students are minors. And then you've got state-level student privacy laws on top of that, which vary significantly by state. Instructure is the vendor, but the institutions are also custodians of this data. So you've got a situation where Instructure bears liability for the platform flaw. But individual universities and school districts also face notification obligations, potential regulatory scrutiny, and the deeply uncomfortable task of explaining to students and parents that their data may be in the hands of a criminal extortion group. That's a multi-jurisdictional legal maze, and institutions are navigating it right now. And I want to be direct about something here. This is not just a Canvas problem. Canvas's market dominance, 8,800 plus institutions, means that a sector-wide audit is now overdue. Blackboard, which is now Anthology, Moodle, Google Classroom, any multi-tenant LMS that offers self-service account creation, that issues personal access tokens, that has API endpoints touching student data, all of them should be running the equivalent of the authorized for account audit right now. Not because they're necessarily vulnerable, but because the Canvas incident has made the attack pattern public. ShinyHunters demonstrated the playbook. And the edtech sector, which historically has not been subject to the same security scrutiny as, say, financial services or healthcare, needs to reckon with the fact that it holds some of the most sensitive data about the most vulnerable populations, children, and it needs to be held to a higher standard. Now, let me get into predictions, and I want to be clear that what follows is pattern matching from the available signals, not first principles certainty. But I think there are two trajectories here that are genuinely worth thinking through. The first is about ShinyHunters' next move, based on their established pattern. And we've seen this with Ticketmaster, with Snowflake-connected victims. When ransoms go unpaid, they don't just disappear, they stage-based. Partial data releases designed to maximize extortion pressure. A full dump all at once is a one-time event. Releasing data in waves, targeting specific high-profile institutions, keeps the story in the news and keeps the pressure on. And here's the timing detail that stands out to me. We are right at the end of the academic semester. If ShinyHunters has 280 million records and wants to maximize institutional disruption costs, timing a release to coincide with finals, graduation ceremonies, or enrollment processing for the fall would be a tactically sophisticated move. I'm not saying that's what will happen. I'm saying that's what the pattern suggests is plausible. The second prediction is the one that I think is actually more structurally significant, and it's the one that most people probably haven't considered yet. Based on the technical specificity of the authorized for account, flaw, and looking at how regulators have responded to prior high-profile API authorization failures, think the post-Optus breach response in Australia, the regulatory pressure following T-Mobile breaches. One plausible direction is that U.S. Department of Education guidance, or more likely state attorneys general, will begin requiring LMS vendors to demonstrate third-party API security audits as a condition of institutional procurement contracts, effectively pushing SaaS edtech towards something like a FedRAMP adjacent compliance framework. That would be a structural shift in how edtech vendors balance product velocity against security architecture. Right now, the incentive structure rewards frictionless onboarding and fast feature shipping. A mandatory audit regime would change that calculus significantly. The timeline is uncertain. Regulatory movement in education technology is historically slow, but the political pressure from a 280 million record breach affecting children is not something that gets ignored. And here's the contrarian take I want to leave you with on the prediction side, because I think it's underappreciated. The most dangerous near-term outcome might not be the data release itself. It might be the chilling effect on the free-for-teacher model across the entire edtech industry. If Instructure kills or heavily restricts that tier, which they almost certainly will, and if other LMS vendors follow suit, you actually reduce access for the individual educators in under-resourced schools and districts who genuinely depended on that free tier to explore and adopt modern teaching tools. The security fix and the equity impact are in direct tension. Locking down the free tier protects the platform. It also potentially widens the gap between well-resourced institutions that can afford full enterprise deployments and under-resourced ones that relied on self-service access. That's a consequence I don't see getting much attention in the security coverage, but it matters. So, let me bring this back to the core arc of what we've covered today, because I think there's a through line here that's worth making explicit. When you started listening to this episode, you probably thought of this as a story about a cyber attack on an education platform. And it is that. But what I hope you're taking away is that it's really a story about how architectural decisions made in product meetings. The decision to offer a free tier. The decision to allow personal access token generation without a developer key. The decision to write an authorization function that defaults to true when a field is nil. Those decisions compound quietly over time until they meet an adversary who knows how to find the seam. ShinyHunters didn't break Canvas. They found the place where Canvas's growth strategy and Canvas's security architecture weren't talking to each other. And in a multi-tenant platform serving 8,800 institutions, that gap was worth 280 million records. If you want to dig deeper on this, I'd point you toward the technical reporting on the authorized for account. Logic. Look for the Halcyon piece on ShinyHunters' extortion campaign against Instructure, which frames the broader context of this group's targeting patterns. Look for the coverage of the May 7 outage and Instructure's statements about what was and wasn't stolen during that incident specifically. And if you're in the edtech space, in security architecture, or in education policy, I genuinely encourage you to read up on FedRAMP authorization frameworks and ask yourself honestly, does the platform your institution relies on for student data meet anything close to that standard? Because if you're watching this story unfold in 2025, you're going to look back at this moment as exactly when the edtech sector's comfortable assumption that education data is low value to attackers was permanently shattered.